You won't believe this, but there were winter nights in the far north when a Viking family, sleeping on crushed straw, wrapped in coarse wool, was actually warmer than we are today under thick comforters in sealed modern rooms. That image feels like a paradox,
Good morning,
but that
little
reality
ones.
is a slap
Did
to
you sleep
everything
well?
we think we know about comfort. Because while modern people believe warmth comes from technology, the Vikings depended on a system so simple it almost looks poor. Dry straw, animal hides, human body
Are you
heat,
warm enough,
and a
son?
smoke-filled house. The shocking part isn't that they
will be
lacked
fine, Mother.
resources. It's that they understood the human body and brutal climate so well that every element, from the warmth stored in the earth, to the smoke drifting beneath the roof, to every layer of straw under the bed, became a finely tuned link in their survival chain. They lived through 20°C nights as if it were just another small challenge, while we, with all our modern materials, still shiver the moment the power goes out for a few hours. And maybe this is the moment we have to ask ourselves how much of our so-called comfort is just an illusion created by convenience. If you've ever spent a cold night and thought you understood what real freezing feels like, watch the rest of this video. Once you see how the Vikings turned straw, wool, and animal hide into a living, heat-keeping machine, you'll never look at your blanket the same way again. You might think that a house without private rooms is a sign of poverty, but inside a Viking longhouse, the truth is far darker. The open space wasn't an architectural choice. It was a brutal survival principle. When outdoor temperatures dropped so low that your breath turned to frost in a single exhale, every partition, every door, every bit of privacy became an enemy, blocking the only flow of heat that could keep a family alive. That's why they destroyed all concepts of rooms, personal space, and separation. Everything was crushed by something stronger, the fear of freezing to death. Picture a night inside that house. Thick darkness, the smell of smoldering smoke mixed with damp air, firewood crackling between the raspy coughs of elders, the restless shifting of children, and the heavy breathing of dozens of bodies trying to keep each other warm. No one had a space of their own, no place to hide, no corner where you couldn't hear someone else's breath. But that suffocating closeness is exactly what kept them alive. Privacy died. Warmth lived. And here's the twist that freezes people in place. In that open space, every human breath truly contributed to the house's temperature, to the point that if just two frail people left the sleeping bench, the entire row could drop by a few degrees, enough to become dangerous. What modern people see as loss of freedom was their shield of survival. So, if it were you, what would you choose? Absolute privacy or the chance to live until morning? There's a moment anyone entering a Viking longhouse for the first time never forgets. The moment you open your eyes and realize you're breathing smoke. Not the delicate little wisps rising from a hearth like in paintings, but a thick black haze hanging just above your head, dense enough to make your eyes sting within seconds. The Vikings lived their entire lives in that air. Every morning, they woke up with soot smeared across their faces, throats dry and scratchy as if they'd swallowed ash, and hair so saturated with smoke it could never be washed clean. Children cried because their eyes burned, while adults were so used to it they just blinked a few times and carried on with their day. But the chilling part is this. Everyone knew they had no other choice.
You must listen.
If they opened the smoke vent wider for easier breathing, cold wind and snow would rush in, snuff out the fire, and threaten the entire household. Living in smoke was better than dying in cold. The damp smell, the scent of animal fur, human bodies, and dried fish hanging overhead all blended into a kind of artificial climate that modern people would want to escape after 1 minute. But for the Vikings, that was the invisible wall protecting them from the white death outside. It's hard to believe that the same thing that burned their lungs was also what kept them alive. And here's the surprise. In the atmosphere we'd call suffocating, they simply called it home. What about you? How many minutes do you think you could handle in that space? Share your guess. You may have seen hundreds of Viking hearths in movies, but nothing is more accurate than this. The heart of a longhouse wasn't a round fire pit at all. It was a long, sleeping dragon line of flames stretching across the center of the house. The Vikings called it the langle, and it wasn't just fire. It was the lifeline of the entire community. Picture a night of blizzard winds, gusts slicing through the turf roof, snow slamming against the thick earth walls, and inside, that long strip of fire forming a warm corridor where everyone huddled together to work, cook, fix tools, tell stories, and survive. A round hearth could only warm a few people. A long fire could keep 20 to 30 people warm at once, so no one was left shivering in the dark. And the light it cast was unique, not bright, but flickering, running along the length of the house, making human shadows dance across the wooden walls like moving spirits. But that beauty came with a very real fear. If the flame faded in just one section, the temperature inside the longhouse could drop so fast that the weakest person might freeze within a few hours. That's why the langle wasn't just for cooking. It was the vein of the house, something everyone guarded constantly to make sure it never died. A Viking home didn't revolve around bedrooms or dining spaces. It revolved around fire, literally. There's a secret most modern people completely overlook when they look at those shadow-filled Viking longhouses. The very thing that made them cough every morning was the same thing that kept the house standing strong for decades. It sounds like some mythical paradox, but it's a raw, almost unbelievable truth. When the long hearth burned day and night and the smoke had no chimney to escape through, the entire longhouse was drowned in a thick, black haze. The Vikings breathed in that air, ate in it, slept in it, and grew up with throats constantly raw from fine soot. Children cried because their eyes burned, and adults were so used to it they barely noticed anymore. Yet something strange happened in that darkness. The smoke coated every timber, every rafter, every plank, turning them into almost immortal material. The resin in the smoke clung to the wood's surface, forming a natural shield against rot, mold, and insects, a protective armor modern builders need chemicals to create. You might think they lived under brutal conditions, and they did. But every breath of smoke they inhaled was also an insurance policy for the very house sheltering them. The thing that weakened their lungs made their roof stronger. Their morning coughs, the wind slipping through the walls, the fire snapping in the night, all of it was the sound of a survival system built on sacrificing human comfort to protect the living space from the deadly cold outside. And here's the real question. If you had to choose between healthy lungs and a house that never rots, which would you choose? Share your thoughts below. Your perspective is part of this story too. You won't truly understand the importance of a Viking bed until you picture this. A winter night at 25 degrees, wind pouring through the roof cracks like the howl of a wild animal, and the inner surface of the wooden wall, right beside where you sleep, covered in a thin, milky layer of ice. The wall is death, sitting just a few fingers away from you. In those conditions, a bed isn't a place to rest. It's the final fortress that keeps the cold from biting into your bones. Because the earthen floor is always damp, always cold, always sucking heat from your body like a silent mouth, Vikings were forced to raise their sleeping platforms as high as possible, away from the ground. But the wall was just as cold, which is why the sleeping benches were always placed with a small gap from it. A buffer zone where warm indoor air could circulate. Sleep too close to the wall and you'd wake up with your clothing frozen stiff. Sleep too low and you'd breathe in the wet, icy air from the ground. Every position inside a longhouse was a life or death decision. The climax of this truth is simple. Vikings didn't sleep to rest. They slept to survive. A layer of straw to absorb moisture, wool that stayed warm even when wet, animal hides to block drafts, all of it combined into a warming machine powered only by their own bodies. When they opened their eyes in the morning and saw frozen droplets on the rafters, they knew they had won another night. So what about you? Facing that kind of killer cold, would you stay calm enough to choose the right place to sleep? You might call straw, wool, and animal hide primitive materials. But for the Vikings, those three things were the most sophisticated heat-keeping technology ever invented with nothing but bare hands. When you look at their bed, don't think of it as a pile of old materials. Think of it as a three-layer machine working non-stop to keep a human alive. The first layer, straw, wasn't for softness. It was an air shield made of thousands of tiny pockets that blocked the cold rising from the damp earth like locking an invisible door. The second layer, wool, sounds rough, but it's a natural wonder. The wetter it gets, the warmer it becomes. The colder it is, the more it expands to hold heat, almost as if it had its own will to protect its owner. And finally, animal hide. The armor no wind could penetrate, turning a human body into a sealed furnace that traps every bit of warmth inside. When all three layers work together, the body becomes the power source, and the bed turns into a self-heating nest inside a smoke-filled house with freezing walls. What's fascinating is that this system works so well that many researchers say it's more advanced than modern beds in extreme cold. And now, if you had to give up one layer, straw, wool, or animal hide, which one do you think matters most? Leave your answer, because the choice you make reveals what you value most when facing a night dozens of degrees below zero. You might think that sleeping together is a sign of poverty, but in a Viking longhouse, it was a strategy of power, a survival statement that even the modern world, with heating systems, air conditioning, and insulated homes, still can't replicate. When outdoor temperatures dropped to the point where breath froze mid-air, every human body became a heat source more valuable than wood, charcoal, or fire. And the Vikings understood this 1,000 years before we did. They didn't sleep in separate rooms like we do. They slept as one living organism, a biothermal system powered by the breath, heartbeat, and sleep rhythm of the entire community. Imagine this. A long row of benches running along the wall, dozens of bodies wrapped in wool and animal hide lying so close you could sense the person beside you just from the change in their breathing. Outside, the wind howled through the roof. Inside, each person was a glowing ember feeding warmth into the entire house. One person weakened. The whole system cooled. In the great hall of Two people left their spot, and the entire sleeping row lost its heat. That was community strength measured in degrees of warmth. And here's the twist. The thing we see today as a lack of privacy, a lack of refinement, a lack of status, was absolute supremacy in a world where being alone meant dying. Vikings didn't show off clothes or possessions. They showed off their ability to keep each other warm. And that was the real power. You might think a Viking bed was something that simply stayed in one place, but the truth is far more unsettling. Just one night without airing the bedding, and the entire longhouse could turn into a nest of lice, fleas, and mites, tiny enemies capable of destroying sleep, health, and even the lives of an entire family during the long winter. That's why caring for the bedding wasn't housekeeping. It was a daily war, silent but just as brutal as fighting a snowstorm. Imagine an early morning when the sun has just begun to rise over the turf roofs. Animal hides are dragged outside, hung on wooden racks, swaying in the cold wind strong enough to numb your fingers within minutes. Smoke residue from the previous night still clings to the surface, and in the dim light you can see the hairs trembling in the breeze as if the hides themselves were breathing. Beside them, straw sacks are flipped out, shaken hard to drive out insects, spread under the frost or the sun, then stuffed back carefully. It's an endless cycle: packed straw, moisture, decay, new straw. Wool must be aired daily so it doesn't smell and doesn't turn into a parasite paradise. Animal hides need alternating sun and wind to keep their natural oils. Skip one day and you'll pay with a week of itching in the dark. And what's truly impressive is this: the Vikings did all of that in freezing cold, in smoke, in near total darkness. They didn't do it for cleanliness. They did it because if they didn't, they wouldn't survive. What do you think about having to air out your bedding every single day in the dead of winter? Share your thoughts below, and don't forget to subscribe to follow us on the next journey into the Viking world.